Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the horror mystery films from 2024, titled Nosferatu. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie opens with a girl named Ellen crying and summoning the company of any entity. She feels utterly alone and desperately seeks comfort using her psychic powers. Moments later, an inhuman voice responds, claiming she has awoken him from eternal darkness. Ellen then falls into a trance, and the entity declares that she doesn't belong in this world and promises to return to claim her. The girl soon begins to feel immense pleasure, but then screams in agony when a scary figure appears and grabs her throat. The scene then cuts to years later, where Ellen is seen waking up from a nightmare. Her new husband, Thomas, greets her good morning, and it's clear that they have a loving and sweet relationship. Ellen mentions that their honeymoon felt too brief and attempts to make love to him, but Thomas reminds her that he has important business to attend to. After he leaves, Ellen suddenly murmurs to herself that he has already got the position and will be sent very far away. Next, we see Thomas walking through the bustling streets of Wisborg, Germany, in 1838. He soon arrives at his workplace, and we learn that he's a real estate agent. His boss, Nock, congratulates him on his recent marriage, and remarks on how beautiful his wife is. Nock then informs Thomas of a foreign count named Orlock, who has expressed a strong interest in purchasing a home in Wisborg. But the twist is that Thomas must visit Orlock's castle in a place isolated in Transylvania to finalize the sale. Thomas hesitates at the thought of traveling so far, but Nock assures him that Orlock will pay handsomely. He adds that if Thomas completes the sale, he will be offered a permanent position with the company. This prompts Thomas to consider his family's future, and he reluctantly agrees to go. Upon returning home, he informs Ellen of the news, saying he will be gone for 6 weeks. She is expectedly unhappy with the news, and begs him not to leave. However, Thomas claims that when he returns, he will have enough money to buy a house and give her everything she deserves. That night, Ellen cuts a lock of her hair and places it inside a locket. Elsewhere, we are shocked to see Nock performing a bizarre ritual naked, assuring his lord that everything has been done according to his orders. The next morning, Thomas leaves Ellen in the care of his wealthy friend, Friedrich, and his wife Anna. The couple already has 2 daughters, but Anna is pregnant again. Ellen looks very worried and begs Thomas to return safely. She gives him the locket in which she has put her hair, before Thomas heads off on his journey on his horse. In the next scene, Thomas arrives at a remote village in Transylvania, where the gypsies greet him with hostility and mock him. An innkeeper then shows up, but he is greatly stunned when Thomas explains that he has come to meet Count Orlock at his castle, and will only be staying for 1 night. The innkeeper reveals that they don't mention that castle, and urges him to leave, but when Thomas offers to pay double the rate, the man reluctantly lets him stay. The next morning, Thomas awakens, only to find the entire village empty, with all of the people gone. Even his horse has disappeared, forcing him to continue his journey on foot. The poor guy walks all day, and later that night, a carriage appears out of nowhere and approaches him. Strangely, there is no coachman, and Thomas climbs aboard. The carriage is clearly headed to Orlock's castle, and Thomas begins to feel increasingly restless about what's happening. Soon enough, the carriage reaches the castle, and Thomas carefully makes his way inside. As soon as he gets in, he sees Orlock. The doors immediately shut behind him, and a monstrous voice of Count Orlock scolds him for his delay. Thomas apologizes and follows him into the great hall, where a table has been set for dinner. Next, Orlock asks him to sit down, and suggests they sign the deal for the sale of the house. Thomas, unable to see Orlock's face clearly, suggests doing it in the morning, but the Count insists he must obey without protest. He then pours a drink for Thomas with his long, scary hands, which terrifies the poor man. While eating, a nervous Thomas accidentally cuts his finger with a knife, so Orlock says he will ease his pain and asks him to sit by the fire. But Thomas begins to sweat and panic as he notices something terrifying about Orlock, who is steadily approaching him. The next morning, Thomas wakes up on the floor in a confused state. He walks through the halls, calling for someone, but the place is deserted. This is when he notices bite marks on his chest, leaving him horrified. The scene then cuts to the previous night, where we see Orlock signing a contract with Thomas. However, he takes out a deed, which is inscribed in an ancient language that Thomas doesn't understand. Orlock even grabs the locket that Ellen gave Thomas, and tells him how fortunate he is to have found love. He then hands Thomas a bag of gold coins, and eventually forces him to sign the deed. After the procedure, a scared Thomas expresses his desire to return home, claiming he's ill. But the Count refuses, saying that traveling in poor health is a bad omen. He then departs with the locket, leaving our hero even more confused. In the present, Thomas searches for a way out of the castle, but all the doors are locked. However, he soon finds a dark passage, and walks through it, hoping to find an escape. But inside, he stumbles upon a sarcophagus covered in peculiar engravings. Thomas carefully opens it, and is horrified to see the withered body of Count Orlock. He attempts to stake him. But after Thomas flees, Orlock grabs the locket, and communicates with Ellen. He ominously explains that her husband will soon be lost to her. In a shocking twist, it is revealed that the mysterious entity Ellen summoned many years ago is none other than this entity. It finally dawns on Thomas that Orlock is a vampire, who fed on his blood the previous night, just like what it did to Ellen. Meanwhile, Friedrich is worried upon seeing Ellen sleepwalking, so he immediately summons a doctor named Sievers. The doctor discusses the potential causes of the disorder, and advises Friedrich to tie her down if things worsen. They then hear Ellen moaning in her sleep, so Sievers gives her some sedatives to calm her down. Meanwhile, Thomas wakes up in the castle, finding himself chased by monstrous dogs. He manages to escape by climbing out of a window and throwing himself into a river. The next day, Dr. Sievers receives news of a deranged patient being admitted to the hospital. He immediately goes to visit the patient, who turns out to be none other than Knock. He is surrounded by dead animals and is acting hysterically. The man claims that his master is coming soon, and eats a dove in front of Sievers. Sievers tries to figure out who he's referring to, but Knock suddenly lunges at the doctor. In the evening, Ellen is having convulsions again while repeatedly shouting, "He is coming." Dr. Sievers then discusses Knock's case with Friedrich, and claims that it is similar to Ellen's condition. He suggests that they contact a specialist, Dr. Albin, who was his former professor. In another scene, a nun discovers Thomas unconscious in the river, and brings him to a church to treat his injuries. The nuns then inform him that the devil has taken his soul, and is leading it astray in his own shadow. They recommend that he stay here because the devil cannot enter the house of God. But Thomas becomes worried for Ellen and refuses to stay. Meanwhile, Dr. Sievers and Friedrich finally visit Dr. Albin. The old man recognizes his former student and greets him enthusiastically. He asks what's wrong, and upon seeing Friedrich, he correctly deduces that a young woman guest of his is suffering from a strange condition, and the duo wonders how he figured it out so easily. Elsewhere, Thomas gets a horse and leaves the church to return to his wife. At the same time, Orlock is also making his way to Visborg, hidden in a sarcophagus aboard a ship. The ship soon begins to experience several setbacks during its journey. The crew members begin to vomit blood, and die one by one for no apparent reason. The captain notices several rats, and concludes that there is a plague aboard the ship. In another scene, Albin arrives at Friedrich's house, and meets with Ellen. She tells him how she has always been psychic, and knows things beforehand. She also tells him about the time when she was feeling lonely and sought companionship, causing an entity to manifest himself in front of her. Ever since then, she has been having nightmares, which are now getting increasingly dark. Soon, Ellen falls into a deep trance, and Albin examines her. He uses a large needle to prick her, but she shows no sign of pain or reaction. Suddenly, Ellen starts convulsing again, and repeatedly says, "He is coming." Albin asks who she's referring to, but the woman does not respond. When she finally calms down, Albin tells Sievers and Friedrich privately that the woman is cursed by a demon. The two are skeptical, claiming it could be a delusion, but Albin is certain it is not. Elsewhere, on the ship, the workers throw the corpses of their crew members into the sea. One of the workers then proceeds to inspect inside the sarcophagus, which is where the rats come from. And then all of a sudden, in the hospital, Nock pretends to be sick, and when a guard arrives, Nock takes the chance to attack him. He then runs into the streets, exclaiming that his master has arrived. At the same time, Ellen suddenly states that he's here, and rushes out of the house. She reaches the entrance, where an exhausted Thomas collapses. Thomas then informs Ellen in a weak voice that Orlock has her locket. Moments later, they learn that a ship has crashed in the harbor, and a lot of rats have infested the city.
It's a plague ship!
Damn it.
On the other hand, Nock meets with Orlock, and escorts him to a ruined mansion. Nock learns that Thomas is still alive, and offers to kill him if necessary. But Orlock asks him to wait, as the man is still useful. Nock then offers to bring Ellen, but Orlock states she has to come to him of her own free will, and they can't force her. The next night, while sleeping, Thomas has a nightmare and pushes his wife away. This prompts Ellen to go to Anna, and she sleeps there for the night. Elsewhere, Friedrich, Sievers and Albin gather to discuss the dire situation. The town has been infested with plague-carrying rats, and people are dying one after another. Friedrich refuses to believe that it is the work of a demon, but Albin declares that some things cannot be explained by science. He insists that if they want to tame the darkness, they must first acknowledge its existence. He then reveals that they are facing an undead plague carrier, the vampire known as Nosferatu. Later, around midnight, Ellen wakes up suddenly. And then,
You.
Orlock reminds her how she summoned him years ago, and says he has come to claim her. He also reveals that Thomas signed a document that bound her to Orlock in exchange for a sack of gold. Upon hearing this, Ellen is skeptical, but the vampire insists it's true, though she must accept the contract of her own free will. He begs her to remember what they once shared, and declares that he will give her 3 days to change her mind. Orlock warns her that if she doesn't agree, he will make Thomas suffer and kill everyone around her. Moments later, Ellen wakes up from that nightmare. To her horror, she sees her friend Anna on the floor, being attacked by several rats. The following morning, the hospital is overcrowded as desperate people rush in for help. Friedrich visits Anna, who feels weak, and claims that the child in her womb is consuming her. She admits that she no longer recognizes herself. Afterward, Ellen tries to warn Friedrich of the evil lurking around them, but he refuses to listen to her, and angrily demands that she and Thomas leave his house for good. Ellen begs him to reconsider, since her husband is still sick, but Friedrich refuses to change his mind. With no other option, Ellen takes her sick husband, and heads back to their home. Later that night, Ellen finally comes clean to her husband, and reveals how she summoned Orlock years ago. She admits that she unintentionally bound herself to him, and he claimed her as his lover. Ellen describes how, at first, it was wonderful, but it eventually turned into torture. Thomas is dumbfounded upon learning all of this, but he still cares about his wife. Just then, Ellen suddenly begins having convulsions, and tells Thomas that he never satisfied her the way Orlock did. This hurts Thomas's ego, so he aggressively starts making love to his wife. Afterward, he expresses to her how much he loves her, and assures her that he will never abandon her. Meanwhile, Albin continues to search for information on how to get rid of the Nosferatu. He soon learns that the vampire can be destroyed if a fair maiden expresses her love for him, and lies in close embrace with him until the first cock crows. The sacrifice will free everyone from the curse of the Nosferatu, and the plague it brought with it. This means that Ellen is the only solution to put an end to this terror. Later, around midnight, Anna wakes up to hear her daughter screaming, while Friedrich is sound asleep. Anna then heads to her daughter's room alone, where she shockingly finds them being attacked by Orlock. The vampire then slowly begins approaching her. The scene then cuts to Anna and her children's funeral, where Friedrich is completely distraught. After the funeral, the group gathers to decide what to do about the problem that Orlock has become. Albine reveals that he has found the resting place of Orlock, and tonight they will go there. They plan to destroy his sarcophagus, so that he will have no sanctuary. Ellen wants to come with them, but Thomas refuses, as he doesn't want to put her at risk. He vows to find the vampire, and drive an iron stake through his heart. Afterward, Albine and Ellen talk privately, and they both know that driving an iron stake through Orlock's heart won't work. Ellen understands that she must sacrifice herself to destroy the vampire, something she is willing to do. But since Thomas will never agree to this, Albine decides to keep him busy at night, allowing Ellen to fulfill the real mission. In the evening, Thomas sets out to find Friedrich, but learns that he's not at home. Elsewhere, we see Friedrich at the mausoleum, where his entire family is buried. The heartbroken man removes Anna's body from the grave, and begins kissing her. Shortly after, Thomas, Sievers and Albine arrive at the mausoleum, and are shocked to find Friedrich lying lifeless next to his wife's body. This leaves Thomas distraught, and the group burns both bodies, before heading to Orlock's mansion. In the next scene, Orlock announces that it is the third night, and Ellen opens her bedroom window, summoning him. Meanwhile, the trio arrives at Orlock's mansion, and makes their way through a room full of rats to find the sarcophagus. They remove the cover and Thomas immediately drives an iron stake through the figure inside. But to their shock, it turns out to be Knock instead of Count Orlock, who is killed. Albine then announces that they must destroy Orlock's habitation so he won't have any sanctuary. Thomas tries to leave to save his wife, but Albine blurts out that the vampire cannot be destroyed without Ellen's blood. Here it finally dawns on Thomas that Albine knew everything and deliberately brought him here. The old man insists that it was necessary, and begins setting the place on fire, while Sievers and Thomas rush outside. On the other hand, Ellen dresses up as a bride and waits for the vampire. Orlock soon arrives, and asks if she agrees to be with him of her own free will. Ellen responds with a yes, which binds her to the vampire. The two then jump into bed and begin passionately making love, during which he drinks blood from her chest. Orlock is so engrossed in feeding on Ellen that he remains oblivious to the sun's first rays piercing through the window. And since vampires are fatally vulnerable to sunlight, blood begins to stream from his mouth and eyes. His body quickly transforms into a decayed, shrunken corpse. Just then, Thomas rushes to the room and finds Orlock lying motionless on top of Ellen. He tearfully holds his wife's hand, and she stares at him, before finally bleeding to death. Seconds later, Albine arrives and asks for forgiveness. He also confirms that her sacrifice has finally freed the city from the Nosferatu plague. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.